The onSecurity podcast aims to inform and challenge the viewer on all things cybersecurity. Our sponsor, onShore Security, is a premier provider of full telemetry cybersecurity detection via its Panoptic Cyber Defense Service and managed security solutions.
Hi again. Welcome to the onShore Security podcast. I'm Stel Valavanis, CEO of onShore Security. We have Huxley Barbee with us today. Say hi, Huxley.
Hi, everybody.
All right. And thank you, Josh Ecklo, for producing. Say hello, Josh.
Hi, folks.
Great. Yeah. So here we are doing it again. And we're here to talk about IoT and OT and detecting them and inventorying your assets on your network and making it all happen. But first, Huxley is going to give us some intro. This is a guy, if you don't know, that has been around the block. One of say kind of like the early champions with a great pedigree, but lately has joined forces with RunZero. I'm very intrigued by that story too. So Huxley, make sure to fill us in.
Yeah. So, hi, everybody. Huxley Barbee, organizer at BSites New York City, also the security evangelist here at RunZero. And, the whole issue of asset inventory has been a problem that's been around a long time. And I remember 20 plus years ago when I first ran Satan. I don't know if you remember.
I remember Satan. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was the very first scanner that I ran to take a look at a network to get an understanding of what was on there. And it's hugely beneficial to my career because I actually found an errant like FTP or telnet server on the Mac of the president of the company. And so it immediately raised my visibility at the organization. But the thing is, something that I noticed over the years is like the asset inventory has still not been solved. And when I heard that there was this company that was working on the least sexy problem in cybersecurity, I was like, I want to take a look at this. And so, joined forces with H.D. Moore and Chris Kirsch, and ended up at RunZero, formerly Rumble. We used to be called Rumble, but we had a rebrand last year.
Right. No, I mean, it's kind of a known name, but like, it just, yeah, you're right. Not sexy. Well, why are we telling? Why don't we let whatever Tenable deal with it or something? Some product. But there's a reason, right? There's a reason. What are these devices? What, they're off on different segments. You don't have helpers to move scans across. What is it? What was underlying this kind of big kind of lacking?
So there was a time when figuring out what are all the things on your network was not easy, but an easier problem to solve because all the devices that you had to protect were in the office and they were all connected to your network somehow. But in the last 20 years, with this sort of divergence of environments, right? The devices are no longer just in the office. They're in your remote employees' homes. They are in the cloud. Your OT environments are now overlaid on top of your IP networks. And so, you have OT environments, then you have to now protect. And there's more and more mergers and acquisitions. And so you have to start thinking about the devices that are in other organizations and what that looks like in terms of how it contributes to your risk posture. So the problem with asset inventory got worse over the last 20 years. And yet it just doesn't have that sort of same draw as like, what's going on with the latest ransomware gang, or like what is the latest cool like attack vector and things like this, because it's kind of boring in some ways. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's boring, but at the same time, like, I don't know. I made this point. Tell me if I'm wrong about this. I made this point that I think that IoT devices are the easiest to protect because they're single use. They could have crappy network stacks, whatever, but I massively segment and I know exactly what their traffic should look like, where it should come from, where it should go. So on the network level, I could really detect that. Am I missing something here? I mean, sexy or not, like just doable. What am I missing here? The placement of them? What you said something along those lines.
Well, listen, more often than not, security teams don't know what are all these IoT and OT devices.
Oh, you're talking about unknown.
Yeah.
I told you that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They're just not known. In fact, there was this one survey from CS2AI recently that said that uh, figuring out the uninventoried assets within the OT environment is one of the primary, like one of the top three concerns, right? Right up there, along with like lack of expertise in for OT security,
Right.
for example. Just they don't know about them, and that would be the first step in order to work on the other things, right? OT devices, IoT devices do not benefit from all the innovation in cybersecurity that we've had over the last 20 years,
Right.
right? There was a time when no devices, your laptop didn't have antivirus, anti-malware, and now all the devices have EDR these days. That sort of innovation has not come to IoT and OT. There are
Yeah.
very, very few security controls that you just add to those devices to protect them. Uh, for the most part, if there are anything, it's network level security controls.
Yeah. Well, I
But,
talk
but
about.
even
Go ahead.
but even then, it's often lacking because a lot of these OT environments used to rely on security by isolation through being air gapped,
Yeah. Yeah.
and as that sort of boundary comes down, all of a sudden they're all exposed.
Yeah. I mean, I generally found enterprises they're also can be weak on the network controls and whatnot. Auditing as well as just kind of setting them, and things get loosened up for functionality, etc. But I want to get back to your point about discovery.
Hmm.
What's the magic there? What's the magic in discovery? You even mentioned stuff that's not even like on the network at all. It's whatever. It's at end users or locations or in the cloud. So to pose the whole discovery challenge to me, and starting at and get into like, well, how do we climb over those hurdles?
Yeah. So the thing with those unknown devices or those unknown unknowns on your network is that many of the approaches that have been attempted don't really address that. They often just address the same managed IT devices that you already know about, that you already manage, that you already protect,
Okay.
right? The use of agents. If you can install something on there, then you already know about it. Or authenticated scans. If you can log into it, you already know about it.
Right.
One other approach that's been tried and theoretically seems to work for unmanaged stuff would be a passive network monitor. Right? The problem here is it takes a long time to get that working. You tend to have to leverage these big beefy hardware boxes that are collecting all this network data,
Yep. Yes, we
right?
do that. That's what we do.
And you have to configure enough switches to get enough choke points on the network to span all the traffic
Right.
to it,
Yep.
right? Which is, if you can even get that done, it takes a long time anyway. And then finally, you're having to fingerprint based on limited traffic data, and so oftentimes you end up misfingerprinting those devices
Sure.
because you're limited. And the thing is, we're living in a world where more and more traffic is being encrypted. So one wonders how useful a passive network monitor could be going forward, especially for on the IT side.
True.
So all of that says that these approaches don't seem to deal with the Achilles heel of asset inventory, which is unmanaged devices and unknown networks. So what you really need to do is actually take a combination of approaches. One is an unauthenticated scanner combined with API integrations. An unauthenticated scanner is does not discriminate between devices. It doesn't need credentials login. It doesn't
Okay.
make any assumptions about the network, and so just can go out there and scan. But of course, the device has to be on the network. So how do you deal with the things that are not on your network, as you mentioned? Well, that's when you bring in the API integrations to then bring in that other part of the asset inventory to get you a full asset inventory.
Okay. We're tapping in the cloud. Well, how about jumping network segments where there's
Yeah.
yeah.
So there's some interesting issues there. If you have a super flat network, then a single scan should be able to reach everything,
Mm-hmm.
right? But if you are highly segmented, then you would need multiple scanners. And so there's some architecture involved for layering on top of a segmented network. But if you have a super segmented network, you probably have folks on staff who are able to do that sort of fleet management that may be necessary. But
Yeah.
generally speaking, it, it's actually very few scanners that you would need to get a good sense of what's on the
Yeah, I
network.
mean, then helpers in the router, or certain kind of allowing. Yeah, there's ways to do that. No,
Yeah.
I definitely, but then now, okay, that's the first step. Okay, so All right, so we talked about dealing with some complex network by either adding scanners or doing something at the routing level to allow to help. Then we talked about, you said APIs. You're referring to in the cloud, in cloud infrastructure. No, what
No,
are you referring to? Go ahead.
no. I mean, it oftentimes it's the cloud if it's like some sort of SaaS solution that's
Okay.
in your IT or a security stack, but it could be an on-premise source that you're pulling from via API as well. It hardly matters. I mean, if there are if you have an on-premise console for your EDR or your phone scanner, you just pull from that.
Gotcha. Or like a workstation, something like that. You can throw something on to do some scanning for some satellite office or something like that. Or
Yeah. So the hard part is actually making sure that you're correlating all this data
yeah.
and deduplicating it so that you have a true view of what your assets are, right? Because you don't want to double count the number of assets and things like this. That just makes your job harder.
Hmm.
So this sort of deduplication is actually a very important part of this sort of asset inventory process. Not just building it, but also maintaining it over time.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
But
yeah. Yeah.
the harder part, or there's I should say there's there are unique challenges though on the OT side and the IoT side, um, that makes it more tricky than just doing stuff in IT. Right, on the OT side, as you scan traditionally or in the past, there's been a bias against active scanning in OT
Hmm.
because there have been some significant, I would say even catastrophic outages
Yep.
when active scanning has been conducted in those types of environments. Of course, they're not published, right? But you just hear about this through the grapevine. In some cases, I've heard about like near misses of danger to human life because somebody actively
Oh, like
scanned.
medical. Yeah. I mean, we've run across with printers left and right, but yeah, medical devices for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah.
things like on the IoT side, you might hear about like, oh, a printer started spewing like 1,000 pages when it
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
scanned. Inappropriate. Like on the OT side, yeah, some of the medical devices, for example, that could endanger human life. But even things like things that you might find in a power plant or a manufacturing plant, where those devices are expected to operate a certain way, but if they go haywire, they might do something very dangerous, right?
Oh yeah, there was that guy in Florida or something that was like they changed the amount of chlorine or something. It was an attack to
Mm-hmm.
do it, and it was like I don't know, Team Viewer or one of those like RDP screen sharing things that was left on, and somebody got in and did a prank or something. But yeah, I mean this it was was caught in time, but it could have killed 1,000 people.
Yeah, I mean, OT to my mind, a lot of it implies critical infrastructure and key resources,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
As term from the government here, CIKR, right? There's a lot here that is potentially very dangerous for society at large, and the more you dig into it, the more you think it's probably a good idea to start looking at moving off grid,
Right, right.
because it is we are shockingly unprotected in
Oh,
our
yeah,
CIKR.
yeah. I mean, and these are talking about all kinds of these devices that historically have not had operating system upgrades. They can only do like firmware upgrades. The manufacturers have moved on to like completely new versions of stuff. I mean, worse than cell phones, right? We all know that about cell phones.
Yeah, yeah. The thing is, many of these organizations, let's just jump back here, right? In our industry, we like to talk about confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
Yeah,
And arguably, on the IT side, confidentiality is relatively more important than the other two.
yeah,
On the OT side, it's all about availability.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
all about availability because one, nobody wants to suffer an outage. Either a politician gets embarrassed if there's an outage, or a commercial organization loses money if there is an outage. But there can even be fines, right? There are many of these critical services are regulated, and if there's an outage, you may be fined for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, avoiding any sort of non-availability is paramount, right? More important than confidentiality, more important than integrity. And so, these organizations often actively avoid any downtime whatsoever. They do not want to do any downtime for patching and updates.
Mm-hmm.
And they also want to avoid the additional downtime that might come from a bad update or a bad patch. And so these devices are just left as they are, as they when they were shipped or first installed. And so if you go on the CISA website and start looking up vulnerabilities for specific PLCs or HMIs, like those vulnerabilities are probably exploitable on those devices because they've never been upgraded.
Oh yeah, yeah, and well, let alone default passwords and stuff like that. You can't, I think cameras kind of, have been in the more kind of widespread thing. The examples you're talking about are, serious and scary, and
Mhm.
definitely the IT professionals, cybersecurity people that are in the spaces that have those, better take note. And let's try to assume the best for the moment, that they're at least aware there's a big issue here, and they're looking for tools and they're looking for methods. But more
Sure.
widely, there's cameras everywhere, there's phones everywhere. For I'm actually surprised phones haven't gotten nailed more. I guess they've gotten firmware updates more, but cameras
Sure.
never, right? So let's go wide. Tell us a little bit about more, the dangers for a wider audience of IT cybersecurity pros, so they can say, hey, this does, refer to me, not just
Yeah.
PowerPoint. Yeah.
So let's think about just as an inventory in general and why that's important. One of the first steps that any adversary takes is to recon the network, right? They don't just attack the one device that you want them to.
Yeah.
They look around and they pick and choose. They're going shopping on the network and figure out like what they want to do next. Now, they're going to do the easy thing, right? We all want to do the easy thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? We all.
Yeah.
And so the adversary is not going to attack that device that is up to date on patches, that has security controls like EDR and what have you. They're going to go after that you know BSD server that's been sitting in the corner for the last 10 years that people have forgotten about, and it's just been sitting idle. And that's the easy target.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're going to go after, right? And so these unknowns or forgotten devices or orphan devices or rogue devices or what have you, those have an outsized contribution to your security posture,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's not okay to think about it linearly. Say, okay, well, I have 95% coverage with my asset inventory, because that last
Yeah.
5%
Yeah. That's what matters. Yeah.
is not contributing only 5% to your security posture. It's far more than that. And the adversary is going to use that as a forward operating position to then do something else on your network. And they're doing this completely under the radar because you didn't know about it.
Well, what are they scanning for? Are they looking for, old OS versions? Are they looking for MAC addresses, that meet a certain manufacturer? I mean, how are they looking for that software underbelly? What is it that they're able to determine to know that that's my soft spot to attack?
Yeah, it's exactly what you're saying, right? Looking for the older operating systems, running older protocols and things like this, right? So, older version of Windows
Mm-hmm.
that maybe has SMB where there are well-known
Yeah.
well-known exploits for which there are already scripts, right? If I,
Yeah.
if I can find a Metasploit module for it, like that's the one I'm going to
But
go
the fact
after.
you're running it, that's a possible opening. You're running an old version. Maybe it's not patched.
Right, yeah, it's not patched, and so that's what you go after. So they'll recon the network, find the easy targets, and then get on there, and then they can start taking their time. They're on your network already. They can start taking their time and start looking around and see what are the next things that they can do within your environment.
Yeah, I actually personally don't know. Sadly, these days I don't get to touch the screws too much. It's kind of a sad thing about people like us as we get gray hairs or no hairs, the case may be. Um, but yeah, I don't know what the response from an IoT device looks like from like a Nessa scan or something, or ZenMap or whatever,
Yeah,
Nmap.
funny enough, a lot of them, and not so much printers, but like a lot of the more modern devices, they just show up as either a Linux box
Okay.
or they show up as one of the IoT toolkits or platforms that many of these devices use. So a Raspberry Pi or SPRIF
Hmm.
are two very common IoT like toolkits, if you will, platforms. And so when most fingerprinting will either come back with the operating system
Hmm.
or or the IoT platform, which doesn't help because as a security practitioner, it matters to you if that device is an IP camera, or if that device is a network attached storage, or if that device is a printer, or if that device is like an internet enabled um, Glade plugin or something like that, right? Yeah,
Right. And the MAC address just gives you that it's all Realtek. It's all Realtek
right,
chipset, you know?
exactly. And so that's not helpful because, you know, as somebody in security, like you want to know, oh, that's an IP camera in a very sensitive location in my organization. Like that is something that's far higher priority than the internet enabled lava lamp, right? So that matters to you. And so as you're doing S discovery, you want to have that level of detail where like the fingerprinting actually tells you what the hardware is, because that helps you do your job.
Yeah. Man, they're gonna eat this up at Blue Team Con. I didn't mention to the audience that you're giving a talk on IoT and OT at Blue Team Con. Thank you for submitting and congrats for getting it, because
Thank
if
you.
the audience
Thank
doesn't know, it's a blind and democratic process by a set of call for papers advisors that pick it. So, but it's one reason I wanted to do this have discussion with Huxley, because that was a very intriguing talk that I think people are going to love it. But anyway, so now, but you did also offer to talk about solutions. Enough of this, like, we get it, we're scared. Okay, fine,
you. Sure.
let's talk
Yeah,
about
yeah,
it.
yeah. So there's a couple of ways of going about this. I've mentioned before passive network monitoring, and like the downside of it is it's very hard to get done right and tends to cost a lot of money, take a lot of time. And but there's two alternatives. One is through active scanning of the OT network, right? The challenge here is, as we mentioned before, like there's this legacy, this bias that comes from like legacy attempts at scanning OT networks,
Mhm.
and the question is how you do active scanning in such a way that it's safe for those devices. These OT devices, I should probably explain this, they often have really old tech stacks or network stacks,
Mhm.
or really unpopular network stacks, meaning they're not they're not really tested for robustness, right? The code on that OT device was tested so that it properly responds to somebody pushing a button or flipping a switch,
Mhm.
not like some random packets coming over the network
Yeah. And they all
or
have
anything.
port 80 open, even if they don't have a web interface. So.
Right, yeah. Um, so the thing is though, they crash. They crash when you use like a legacy scanner like Nessus or Nmap. They will very often crash, and then you get into this problem of outage, which we said in OT is a big no-no. So one of the important things is when you do active scanning, you have to do it in such a way that it is standards compliant, that you're not using security probes, and you're doing something that we call incremental fingerprinting
Hmm.
in order to make sure that uh, that you're being safe for that particular device. What you're doing here is you are sending requests to the device as part of the scan and fingerprinting at the same time. And so you, with each request or response that comes back from that device, you're adding to your fingerprint, understanding what that device is, and then based on the fingerprint you have so far, you avoid certain queries or you do certain queries
Got it. So
in
you
order
start light instead of going bam, 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 bam. Let's start light, do something we know is going to be unintrusive,
correct.
and then like use that. So I mean, it's got to be, you got to have a lot more intelligence going on. You can't just like run the screen, use a script, go through it. It's got to have a feedback loop. But this is all automated. I mean, I assume you're talking about RunZero's tool right here now, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Yeah. Now that's one way. This is the sort of active scanning approach. The
Yeah.
other
Okay.
one is what we call passive traffic sampling. So this
Okay.
is very different from the passive network monitor where you got the big beefy hardware box that's collecting all the network data.
Yep.
Instead, what you're taking is that passive traffic. You're taking that traffic passively, and you're not trying to save every single network call that came over that switch. You're just basically grabbing the stuff that you need in order to do asset identification, and then
Mhm.
you're dropping everything else.
But
And so
you still need a span port on the switch to get it. It's just that you're only taking the net flow or metadata, whatever headers, and not payload.
yes, you still need a spam port, right? And so like we don't say it's either active or the passive traffic sampling. I mean, you could do both at the same time.
Yeah.
But the important thing here is it doesn't have the same sort of cost or footprint as a full blown passive network
No,
monitoring.
not even close. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, in fact, this can all be done in software. In fact, it could be all done in the same binary as the active scanner, so that doesn't require any sort of additional installation
Right.
of software or anything like that. So passive traffic sampling.
Huh. So is it? Yeah. So you're looking at the packets as they fly, stealing some whatever header data and net flow, and
Mhm.
using that to ID the device in addition to the tiered whatever scanning like lightweight profile next step depending on the profile or whatnot. That's called active scanning, and passive scanning is the network capture network.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Awesome.
essentially, yeah,
Awesome.
network capture, and then just sampling based on that. Yeah,
Wow. And so and again, so this hasn't been done before. Why? Just hasn't been sexy enough. Like, yeah. That's not where, or it's not like VCs loving it because there's a big intellectual property play or something.
well, come on, like all the VCs are investing in zero trust, right?
Right. Right.
Or passwordless authentication these days. Yeah, I mean, like it's an old problem is the thing,
Yeah.
and oftentimes I find that many folks believe that asset inventory is important, right? I think there's some survey that said like 85%
Yeah.
of organizations believe that asset inventory is important, but just as many believe that they have already solved the problem with some existing tool that does asset discovery on the side. So,
Yeah.
oh, I have my EDR, so that's kind of like the asset inventory, or I have my vuln scanner, so that's kind of my asset inventory. I have a CMDB, so that's kind of my asset inventory. And the issue there goes back to something I was saying earlier. It's the unknowns on your network. It's the unmanaged devices that have an outsized contribution to your security posture. That is where the adversary is going to go. So you might think, oh, 95% coverage with my asset inventory, good enough.
Oh.
And that is not the case. That really is not the
And
case.
it's still number one on CIS and the NIST
That's right.
frameworks and whatever. So
That's right.
wow. Well, thanks for opening my eyes. And I'm like now ready. Like I got to get my CTO on and say like look at the different scanning we're doing, and we do packet capture. We do full packet capture at our clients, and like, oh wait, great. Are we have a way to automatically profile those devices that don't show up, whatever as known assets. Or maybe we call up RunZero. Maybe that's time. I was at a RunZero event at RSA actually, so I was like, oh wow, this is awesome because I'll be talking to Huxley soon.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Excellent.
Cool. Well, thanks for doing that. Now, is there anything you want to tell us about your kind of story of jumping on board with RunZero? I don't know how recent that was, but is there any angle there that
It,
you think is worth telling?
it was a year and a half ago. It's been a great journey so far. I've watched the company and the product grow from what it was to something like that is just so much more expansive in terms of asset inventory. When I first joined, we weren't really looking at OT environments as much as we are now.
Gotcha. Okay. So it's become like hey, how are we better than the rest? Like what's the thing that's missing, or we we can do better. And well, that's awesome. And I think you're gonna be well received at Blue Team Con, and certainly make sure we hang out and chat there. We have a lounge this year too, so it's like after the talk, I guarantee you're gonna have like 10 people in line wanting to like talk to you after you give your talk, and she'll say,
Sure.
"Hey, wait a minute! I found out that Blue Team Con this year has a lounge just for this. Let's just go over there to the next talk to get in here." So you're
I love speaking at other conferences because as the organizer for B-Sides NYC, I'm always looking to see what the other conferences are doing and see what I can bring back to our own conference. So it's just this great sharing of information, like
yeah.
both within the conference but also across conferences. So
Oh well,
really enjoyed that.
you're right. I will grab my co-founder Frank, and we'll get on a plane, come to New York for the next New York B-sides.
Oh,
Just hang
love
out
it.
with you. Just hang out with you. So
Absolutely.
we'll do it. We'll do it. Awesome. Well, Huxley, thanks for being great participant here. This is a topic that needs to get discussed further, and we got to explore those tools, and see if we can notch it up, get our organizations more mature. Josh Ecklow, thank you, sir, for excellent production as always. And we'll see you all around next time.